With Jimbo Fisher fired and the Texas A&M head coaching position open, many people have been speculating, Drew, who the next coach is going to be. At the top of a lot of people's list is Coach Prime, who, at Colorado in his first year has the skill position players on both sides of the ball, but in the trenches is where they have been struggling if you're talking about Colorado. And what better place to go if you're Coach Prime and have been complaining about the line than an SEC team that's had multiple number one recruiting classes that are there right now. Now, Coach Prime came out and said, I'm here and I'm not leaving, talking about at Colorado, but he just had his biggest recruit since Travis Hunter, five-star receiver Winston Watkins Jr., decommit from Colorado. And his reasoning was he did not know if Coach Prime was going to be there when he got there. Those are his exact words. So what does this mean for Coach Prime and this Texas A&M job? Although he said he doesn't want it, that five-star decommitted saying he didn't know if he was going to be there, that could raise some speculation. Drew, when you look at all this news with Coach Prime and Texas A&M, do you think he leaves Colorado in his first year?
It's hard to tell. You can only go off what people say so much nowadays. And Coach Prime, he just got there. He doesn't need to be leaving Colorado right now. You don't need to be bouncing from team to team because it's just not a good look for you. Like you mentioned, that player decommitted already. You don't want to be in a situation where you're going from team to team and you're trying to recruit all these players and then you have them questioning whether or not you're going to be there by the time they get there or not, because that's just going to make it harder for you to recruit. And it's just a bad look. Coach Prime took this job and he made it seem clear that he wanted to go there and rebuild this Colorado program. And coaching at Colorado versus coaching at Texas A&M is two totally different ball games. It is a different standard in the SEC. Colorado, I think, is a good fit for him because he has that room for error where he can have a bad season or two, and there's always that, well, the talent's not there, excuse that you could fall back on. At Texas A&M, Coach Prime is going to be expected to win 8-9 games off the rip at the minimum. And I think Coach Prime, he doesn't have enough Power 5 head coaching experience to where I think he needs to be taking a job like that yet. Sure, he did a great job at Jackson State, and sure, he's done a pretty good job at Colorado. I mean, this was a team that only had one win last year. And to get him to 4 wins, I think is pretty impressive. I think, and I said it before the season even started, if Coach Prime can get this team to 3 or 4 wins, I think that's a good year. And he did that. But there is no reason for him to be leaving Colorado yet. I think he's got to prove himself and prove what he can do at Colorado, and that's going to take 2, 3, 4 years. If he can find ways to win in those upcoming years, then I think it's time for him to look at a bigger job like a Texas A&M. But for right now, Aiden, he doesn't need to go anywhere. He needs to prove himself in the Power 5 before he even starts thinking about the SEC.
Yeah, and he said multiple times before this Texas A&M position opened, when it was rumored that he was going to go to the NFL with his sons, he put that to rest too, saying like, look, I'm at Colorado. I'm here to rebuild something. He thinks he's there for a reason and he has a purpose for being at Colorado. So I agree. I think he needs to stay there and build a program up. You mentioned it. The SEC is a tough division. Now, as an Aggies fan, I would want Prime as the head coach. I'm not going to lie, because I've said this in the Jimbo Fisher firing video. The SEC, as we know it, is completely changing. Texas and Oklahoma are coming next year. We're going divisionless. So every team is going to play everybody in the SEC. If you're going into a rebuild in the same year that this conference is changing, you could be in trouble. You're going to be looking at some bad years for multiple years in a row, and you don't want to be labeled as the team that sucks in this new era of the SEC. If you get Coach Prime, it's not going to be a rebuild. He is going to bring those guys from Colorado that he wants to bring down. And, recruits are not going to transfer out if Coach Prime is the head coach. My biggest worry for Texas A&M is that they're going to get a head coach in who might not be, a big name like a Coach Prime or a Kirby Smart or a Nick Saban or a Dan Lanning, and they'll transfer out. Because why would you stay invested in a rebuild in today's modern era of football when there's NIL in the transfer portal? You could just leave and go to a school where you're either going to be a dog or a school that is competing, nationally ranked level. So with that being said, Texas A&M got to be careful who they hire, because if they hire the wrong guy, they could be looking at a mass exodus of players. Now, getting into, that's Coach Prime. Dan Lanning, head coach at Oregon, former defensive coordinator for Georgia, and Kirby Smart. You and me are both big fans of Dan Lanning. And I think that when he went to Oregon, that was a perfect fit for him. because Oregon, they have the prolific offense. They're known for having a big O-line there. They're kind of built like an SEC team out there out west. Dan Lanning comes and instills that defense, and that defense looks much, much improved from last year. So I think this Oregon fit is great for Dan Lanning. Personally, I don't see why he would want to go to Texas A&M, where it's been a dumpster fire the last couple of years, and the seat is so hot all the time, like you mentioned.
Yeah, Dan Lanning's built something really good at Oregon, and I think it would be silly for him to leave that now. I mean, when you go out to a team like that and you try to rebuild and you successfully do it, I don't know, like you said, I don't know why you would want to leave that. Now, from Texas A&M standpoint, I would much rather have a Dan Lanning, a guy who's already proven himself that he can get a team to a winning standard after a couple years compared to a Deion Sanders who, again, I'm not saying this to bash Deion. We just don't know yet because we haven't seen Deion Sanders prove that he can get his team to a very high winning standard. I can't stress that. I think Deion Sanders is a good coach. But when you're Texas A&M, I think you're looking for a more safer. It's a gamble anytime you hire a new coach. But I think if you're Texas A&M, you want a guy who's been in the Power 5 for a long time, who's had a lot of success in the Power 5 no matter what their job has been. But in the same breath, I don't see Dan Lanning going to Texas A&M. I don't see Dan Lanning going anywhere. Oregon's going to pay him good, and he's in a situation right now where this Oregon team, who I think is honestly playing some of the best football in all of college football right now, he can get them to the playoffs in his second year. If he does that, the money that he's going to be making is going to be through the roof. And like I've already mentioned before, when you're coaching out in the Pac-12, I know Oregon's a big name team out there. It's still different than in the SEC. The pressure for Dan Lanning to win out in Oregon is still there, but it is nowhere near what it would be at Texas. These fans are ready to win at College Station. There is too much talent there. They want a guy who's going to come in and get them to 9 or 10 wins from the very beginning. And if you're Dan Lanning, I don't know why you would want that pressure on yourself when you're already winning and secured your job and position up in Oregon. People already love him up there. So I think Dan Lanning's out of the question, Aiden.
Drew, one name I feel like could be a possibility that I'm not hearing much is the offensive coordinator for Michigan, Coach Moore. He's the guy who stepped in as the interim coach when Harbaugh got suspended, and he coached Michigan to that win at Penn State. They controlled the game the whole time. So he has experience leading a group of men in a big game. He's an experienced offensive coordinator. The coach or the players have massive respect for him. Coach Harbaugh has said nothing but great things about him. And many people believe that he could be a head coach very, very soon. So that Michigan offensive coordinator could be a candidate for that Texas A&M job. Like you said, it wouldn't surprise me, though, if they went with a little more conservative of a pick and took someone who's had some head coaching experience, because they did that with Jimbo Fisher. They took a guy who they kind of knew what he was before he got the job. He hasn't won that national championship since the 2013 season. With that being said, Chip Kelly's reportedly being fired at UCLA. So could they get a Chip Kelly? I am not a big fan of him as a head coach. I'm not saying that schematically and on the whiteboard he doesn't know what he's talking about, but just as, an inspiring figure, to rally the troops. I don't think Chip Kelly's that guy. But it wouldn't surprise me if they went with somebody like a Chip Kelly, who's been at multiple different places, head coach at multiple different places.
Yeah, Chip Kelly could be a real threat to getting this Texas A&M head coaching job, Aiden. And then, like you said, I agree with what you said. I don't think Chip Kelly is going to fit in well with the SEC. He just seems more of like a West Coast kind of coach. You look at some coaches and you look at some players and you look at them and you're like, okay, they fit in here, or they fit here at this team, or this demographic of the United States. Chip Kelly just doesn't strike me as an SEC guy. Now, talking about Coach Moore from Michigan, he has proven after one game that I think he's capable of taking a head coaching role and being able to coach a team. Now, in the same breath, though, I think a lot of that's going to depend on what Jim Harbaugh decides to do after this season. There's rumors of him potentially leaving, especially amidst of all the allegations going on up there. Jim Harbaugh's been flirting with the NFL, it seems like, at the end of every season. I think a lot of that is going to depend on what Jim Harbaugh decides to do. If he goes to the NFL, I can see Coach Moore in a situation where he just takes over that head coaching job. But in the same breath, too, if Jim Harbaugh decides to stay at Michigan, I think Coach Moore would be a pretty good fit for Texas A&M. He's been in the Power 5. Like you said, he's had head coaching experience in a big game already. And it all is going to come down to what the Texas A&M mindset is. What kind of coach do you want? Do you want to take another gamble? You just proven that you picked a guy who's kind of, the conservative pick and it didn't work out for you. Do you want that, or do you want to take a more aggressive approach and get someone who hasn't really proven themselves yet? But if you see a scenario, and if look, when you go aggressive and you take someone that you don't know is going to be a good fit or not, you have to be willing to go through a season or two of just down years, right? But if you're Texas A&M, you've had down years for the past however many years you want to go back. So, I mean, at this point, you got to ask yourself, how much worse can it really get? But to really just sum it all up, I think when it comes to Coach Moore at Michigan, it's all up to Jim Harbaugh. I think that's going to be the determining factor of who Texas A&M decides to get. And it also kind of what's really a thing that needs to be in question is how quickly is Texas A&M trying to get a new coach? Are you going to roll with an interim coach for the rest of the season? Or do you want to take a lot of time to make sure you don't butcher this one and wait till after the season's over before you bring someone in? All those things I think are going to factor who Texas A&M pursues.
Yeah, especially with the NIL and the transfer portal, those guys will leave after a couple weeks of uncertainty. It's going to be tough to keep those guys in the building. And as far as my thought process goes, for example, Jimbo Fisher, he's the perfect example. You know what you're going to get from him. He's a good coach. He's a solid coach, but he's not a Kirby Smart or a Nick Saban. So you can't be mad whenever he gives you 7 wins or 8 wins for multiple years. That's what he is. You know that. Why wouldn't you take a chance on a guy who could be, the next great coach? And if he's not, like you said, you're in a rebuild anyways. Just get rid of him and go with the next guy. Now, it's easier to say that than do it because you don't want to be getting a new coach every 2 years for, 6 years. But I would rather take a chance on a guy that I think his ceiling is higher than I think someone who's already hit their ceiling. That's just me. But it's going to be interesting to see what the Aggies do. Like I said earlier, going into this new SEC without divisions, adding 2 great teams. They're not the only team in Texas in the SEC anymore, and Sarkisian's been recruiting SEC caliber players specifically on that line for years. So if Texas A&M has a couple bad seasons coming up, we could be looking at like a Vanderbilt situation with the A&M Aggies. It wouldn't surprise me if they were bad for like 6 to 8 years.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe, or hit the notification bell, and let us know down below in the comment section who you think Texas A&M should pursue, or what are some coaching candidates that could be out there that we didn't hit on that could be rumored to go into Texas A&M. All that stuff that you heard, let us know. We'd love to hear it. And that's going to do it, guys. We'll see you in the next one.